State University Faculty Lecture Series. For those of you who don't know who I am Jessica Lardy. I am professor and director here, and I coordinate for the Faculty Lecture Series. And I inherited this from Courtney from once upon a time. She used to do this. Thanks for attending tonight's lecture. Keep an eye out for future announcements or upcoming lectures that I send out and are also in the university calendar. Next week's lecture will be in this room at 6 p.m. Dr. Michelle Mann from Teacher Education will present her lecture entitled An Investigation of Students' Identity Work and Science Learning at the Classroom Margins. So tonight's event is presented by Dr. Courtney Allen of Counselor Education. She's joined by some doctoral students, and I will let her introduce them when it gets to that point. But in regards to Dr. Allen, she holds a PhD in counseling and counselor education. It is and is an associate professor of counselor education here. She trains doctoral and master level students in both clinical mental health counseling and professional school counseling. She has much experience in diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI work, and regularly incorporates social justice perspectives into her pedagogical practices. Dr. Allen has extensive training in DEI, including participating in 2 immersive institutes on equity and inclusion. Dr. Allen serves on ASU's Equity Board and recently conducted a campus climate survey to assess the levels of diversity, equity, and inclusion on this campus. Additionally, Dr. Allen has conducted much research on narrative theory and counselor development. She has multiple presentations on narrative theory, techniques, and pedagogy. In addition to teaching, she currently has a small private practice in counseling. So help me in welcoming the doctoral students and Dr. Allen.
Thank you so much. I would like to say that this is my presentation, but it's really not. This is a collective presentation, and I need to give some serious accolades to my doctoral students that are joining me tonight. I would like to introduce you to them first. I'm going to go by the Brady Bunch board here. This is Kelsey Scanlan, Mary Woodson, Jeff Tucker, and Suresh. I'm going to let you say your last name.
It's Suresh Tamang.
Tamang. And so these are our current doctoral student. I'm actually the chair for Gray's dissertation. 3 of them are in the midst of getting ready to finish their dissertations. And Suresh, so they are cohort 8, and then Suresh is a more recent cohort 6 in our doctoral program in counselor education. They're going to be sharing their stories with you tonight. I think that's the most exciting part about this presentation, so I'm going to try to get through the slides quickly so we can actually get to the demonstration part. So you can see how integrating narrative tools can actually lead to very deep conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Oh, there we go. So when we recently, this August, the Equity Board, in which a few of us in this room actually sit on, had a retreat. And in this retreat, we had an amazing speaker whose name actually eludes me right now. Do you remember the name of the speaker? I'm looking at you. Dr. Steins. The name of the speaker for our Equity Board retreat? Anyways, I know I'm blanking right now. But she shared this slide with us, and I wanted to share it with you. This is a slide about the different areas in which we can kind of identify our privilege and that we might actually have some oppression around. As you can see, there's a wide array, everything from class, ethnicity, even neurology, disability, religion, your primary language, your skin tone. These are very common ways in which we are sort of judged by society, and that we can either hold power or not have power or lack power. This presentation is going to pull upon the work from Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. Dr. Crenshaw identifies this idea of intersectionality. So if you think back to the previous slide and all the different areas that you might identify, like that you might have some sense of identity in, how do those areas intersect? So my position as a woman in the world, I might have certain power. I might actually lack power in certain ways. My positionality as a white person in the world, I might have a lot of power. Put the two together, where does that place me? So in some situations, I hold power. In other situations, I might be lacking. So Crenshaw is the first to kind of introduce this idea and to bring it into the discussion. This is also from our equity retreat. I thought it was worth sharing to kind of lay the groundwork for our discussion on narrative. So when we look at our power, we consider ways in which and by the way, I would cite this, but I'm not actually sure where it's from. This is ways in which we might have positional power or personal power. Let me move the doc students so y'all can see that a little bit better. Possibly. There we go. So positional power, this covers areas such as legitimate power, like you're the boss, possibly reward power, which is like monetary, possibly bribery, coercive power, which is protection racket, so like if you are in the protective group, and resource power, who controls the resources. Personal power, this is like referent power, such as if you have social power, like you're very well liked. Your expertise might give you power, such as like if you're have a specialty area. Informational power, it's what you know. It's interesting, by the way, I see this used sometimes in like little micro ways. So like when you're in a group and you hear people use acronyms, and you have no idea what they're talking about, but you don't want to ask, that's kind of a way of gaining power, this informational power. Connection power is kind of who you are connected to. So this is some questions I wanted to share with you, because I kind of want you to pause for a moment and consider, what ways do you have positional power, and what do you do with that? We all have these in different areas of our lives. And if you go back to the whole list of the realms in which you either hold power or not, and consider those, in those realms, which ways do you have positional power? How can you leverage that power? How could you leverage your privilege? How could you possibly leverage that to help someone with less power or privilege? Has there been any times that you've used your power and privilege that you might even regret? We like to think of the times in which we use it for good. But if we really kind of are honest, in what ways have we maybe used it for self-gain and possibly hurt those around us? In which context does your privilege or disadvantage show up? Are there contexts where they show up less or not at all? So in a little while, when we do this activity, you're going to hear my beloved doc students really share some personal stories. And we've actually given this presentation probably about 4 times now in different areas. And every time I hear them talk, I'm like, wow, like it's like this intersectionality of all their different identities. And you will hear ways in which they have held power and ways in which they have been really oppressed or limited. So I really wanted to share these slides with you tonight, mostly to kind of provide a framework for which you to sort of view or really kind of hear their stories. Okay, so let's talk about narrative theory. Does anybody know what narrative theory is? I just was talking to a colleague earlier tonight and realizing that you might think like literature when you hear narrative, right? So narrative theory is actually a counseling approach. So I'm a counselor of education. So this is a counseling approach that looks at the way we story our lives. And the power of this theory is that it asks us to reflect on our positionality in the world, ways in which we have power, ways in which we have privilege. So it kind of melds nicely with DEI work. I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so drawn with it. It identifies these dominant discourses. So dominant discourses are sort of the discourses like might is right. That we are independent and there's nothing that can hold us back if we just try hard enough. Work smarter, not harder. These are sort of like dominant discourses that really have, to some degree, infiltrated our society. Society holds them up, but they're also in our family. So as a child, I was told, like, education is the way that you leave the farm. So you will be educated. I was also told that women are the ones who cook, and after dinner, men sit on the porch and women are in the kitchen doing dishes. Like, that's kind of the big message that was given to me as a child. Of course, I've deconstructed that. that is not necessarily the case now. But this approach to counseling and this approach to seeing the world, it really asks us to identify these narratives and consider alternate storylines, ones in which the dominant narrative might deny us power, but what are times in which we did have power? We were able to overcome whatever challenge or problem that we had in that moment. So through this approach, we deconstruct the narratives and examine them in new ways. I like to say that we tilt our head a little bit and look at it differently in a new perspective. As you all know, that when we create narratives, they have this stigmatization ability, particularly in counseling. We think about diagnosis. What if we consider a diagnosis just as a story? It's a story that a lot of folks identify with. That's a story that a lot of folks might even find comforting. It's like, oh, other people share this story with me. Other folks might find it very stigmatizing. Well, I've got this label on my head. I can't get away from this. This narrative, this story is encompassing me. So this approach, it considers that. It considers how the dominant narrative is really leading the way, as opposed to the person having their own personal agency and power to write their own story. So when we consider storytelling rights, in therapy, it's the client who has storytelling rights. But when we look in society, we all have our own storytelling rights. We can listen to the dominant narrative and hear it, but ultimately we can decide. It's very empowering. We can decide what we're going to do with that, how we're going to change our relationship to it. In examining this, we're talking about this at a kind of individual level, but we cannot miss the importance of looking at community, because community has that heavy influence on how we see ourselves. This idea of reflective appraisal. So I view myself through your eyes. So if you see me as valuable, I'm more likely to see myself as valuable. So from this approach, like in counseling, we actually will call upon the community to help the client. Like through letter writing, we might have the client go out and have conversations with loved ones, with members of their life that they hold dear, and ask for some honest feedback. So we're kind of eliciting the power of the community. Two of my favorite quotes. Let me move I keep moving y'all around, sorry. This is from White. So Michael White and David Epstein were the original authors of narrative theory. It came about in the early 1900s, so it's actually a more recent theory. It's used in counseling. It's also used in psychology. It's becoming very common, but it's what we consider an emerging theory. So this quote, "The person is not the problem is the problem." Why is that powerful? It externalizes the problem from living within the person. So that shame, blame, and guilt that we all feel when it's like, oh God, it's my fault. Does anybody else have like a really bitchy inner critic in their mind? I mean, I've always said if I was going to write a book, it'd be called My Inner Critic is a Bitch. I mean, she says awful things to me, like really at the worst time, right? But listen to how I narrate that. She says awful things to me. It's not me. It's this bitchy inner critic. So if I start to externalize her out here, and I start to tell her to shut up, suddenly I'm like, wow, no, I'm not listening to that today. Not today. Shut it. These are like, you can hear my internal dialogue, right? So this approach, in some ways, it's actually been criticized. It's like, well, what about your personal responsibility? You did this, or you did that, or you abused this partner, whatnot. We could do that all day long, but the shame, blame, and guilt that comes from that, it just makes us stuck. So when we externalize the problem, no. So like the anger made me do it. And you can even name that. There's some power in a name. So like, just like my bitchy critic, my anger monster might have its own little name. But that kind of gets a hold of you. Do you hear the language? It gets a hold of you. It overcomes you. So if we talk about our relationship to that, then I can change my relationship to it. Instead of being overcome with it, I can outsneak it. I can tell it to shut up. I can tell it, visit me tomorrow. Grief, even grief, which is so incredibly overwhelming. I'm sure you've had some losses in your lives, right? And sometimes that loss just speaks to you so loudly and in ways that feels like you just can't even function. What if you could have a conversation with that grief, hold its hand and say, you know what, tonight we'll spend some time together. Tonight I'll lean into that. But for right now, I gotta go teach this class. Or I've gotta go do whatever that you do. So it's a way of externalizing our internal dialogues. So I also love this other quote, which is externalizing conversations employ practices of objectification of the problem against cultural practices of objectification of people. So our culture tends to objectify people. What if we objectify the problem and stick it out here and put it in front of our cultural practices? It really changes the narrative. No longer is the people the problem's the problem. Okay. In counseling, in a narrative approach to counseling, but when I'm talking about counseling, but I use this in all aspects of my life. Anybody who knows me, I just can't help but it's the way I kind of see the world and I speak about the world. It utilizes this idea of scaffolding conversations. So you're going to build upon a conversation so that it gets deeper and deeper. And you will see that as the group presents tonight. This is going to be an authentic, real group, but you can kind of watch it start to build upon itself. When we are scaffolding conversations, we're kind of utilizing that zone of proximal development. I'm not sure if y'all know this term, but let me kind of explain a little bit. So this is like the world that we know. And our zone of proximal development is like this surrounding ring. It's things that we might have some kind of awareness or familiarity with, but maybe not know intimately. So this is the area that we can start to pull upon. It's just what's right underneath the water, what we can kind of maybe see. And so we're pulling upon that. So I hear a little bit about your story, and I'm going to ask a little bit more about your story. So it starts to deepen that conversation. This idea of wiggle room, this is not an academic term, this is a Courtney term. One of my narrative terms. When we have a problem, we feel very stuck by it. So we want to create some kind of wiggle room around that problem. So I see these factors and they all feel like they're not budging. I can't see any other way around it. Maybe the wiggle room is, okay, let's just breathe for a minute. Let's just breathe and let the moment pass and see if it looks differently in the next moment. But or tilting your heads a little bit and looking at it again with a new perspective. So it's creating sort of a movement around the problem or the stuck story. If you're in a group, which we'll see in a minute, and can be a therapeutic group, it could just be a talking group. It doesn't have to be like a counseling group per se. As folks are talking, you'll see the group members sort of reflect and ask questions that kind of create wiggle room around these stories or a new perspective on the stories. The reason this idea of personal agency, the reason why I particularly think that narrative is such a great fit for DEI work is that it really fosters personal agency. You know, Paulo Freire said, only the oppressed can free the oppressed. And so if you're giving room to the author of their own, folks being the author of their own stories, you're allowing them to have their own personal agency, to change their story, change their narratives to be one that fits for them and not necessarily the way that the world is telling them that they need to live their lives. Last point here is this idea of responsibilities. So in counseling, we need to figure out who's got the responsibility for the story. Not surprisingly, it's the client. And in life, who is responsible for your story? Ultimately, you are. And from this perspective, now, is it influenced by society? Absolutely. We cannot discount these dominant narratives. Our stories are heavily influenced by what we've been told. But if we start to externalize that and consider the story, how can we change our relationship with it? And how can we change our position in it? As a counselor in this approach, I'm like a creative, vibrant guide. I bring the vivid language. I bring let me shine some light on this aspect of your story that you might not be seeing. I bring the sort of like, oh wow, the curiosity, the kind of oh wow kind of moment. I am there and engaged, but I really make sure that I keep a decentered position and that the clients or the person I'm listening to has the floor. Okay. I want to just talk a little bit about landscapes. This is from narrative theory. Narrative theory looks at 3 different landscapes. Landscapes of action, which is the who, what, when, and where, and how of the story, kind of like the nuts and bolts. It's landscapes of consciousness, which is the meaning making in the story. And then this is related to the landscape of identity. So landscape of identity is how we create our identity based on the meaning making that we've engaged in. And so in a narrative approach, we ask a lot of questions, a whole lot of questions. And I'll show you those in just a second. But the reason why we're asking these questions, we're trying to help the client consider changing their relationship with the problem. And there's a lot of power in a good metaphor. So instead of always battling things out, there's other things that we can do with our problems. We can walk out on our problems. We can dispel them. We can even educate them. We can recover, reclaim them. We can disprove them, reduce them. There's more on here. I'm not sure what happened to them. But we can, if we need to, battle them out. Sometimes we might need to do that. But that's not the only way we have to go. So here's some examples of narrative questions. Unique outcome. These are looking at noticing aspects of the story that contradict the dominant narrative. So times when the outcome didn't fit the dominant narrative. Unique accounts. So what features were like present in the story that might lend itself to an alternative story. Unique redescription, looking for a slight variation in the way that folks are telling the story and really kind of pulling upon that thread. Unique possibilities, so like, okay, that's the way the story went, but what else could happen? Where else could this have gone? Unique circulation, this has to do with telling others the story. Experience of experience, seeing yourself through the eyes of others. And then counterviewing, which is really intensely being critical of the dominant narrative associated with your story. So, some takeaways, and then we're going to move into the group. Understanding your own power. So this is kind of marrying the kind of DEI slides and the narrative slides. Understanding your own power is empowering. By identifying parts of your identity where you hold privilege and where you might be marginalized, it helps you create empathy for others and helps connect your stories. You'll see that in the group, ways in which they find connection. They're naturally seeking it. Whenever we've done these groups, I've not given them any prompts, but they're looking for connections in their lived experiences, and they're looking to understand the ways in which they're different. The last takeaway is knowing how power and privilege operate within your system. So a system is my role as a woman in the world, my role as a United States citizen, my role as a professor, a person in academia, a middle-aged person. So these are all the different systems. But by knowing them and understanding them can help you interrupt forms of inequities in the world. It can help you identify with them and help change the dominant narratives that are influencing our society today. Okay. So So narrative exercises, there's a ton, and I will be happy to have longer conversations with any of you about any of these. I'm gonna give you a quick snippet of these, and then we're gonna go into an I am from poem that I actually pulled from one of the Equity Institutes that we did here at Adams. So we're gonna do the poem in a moment, so I'll put a pin in that. Using artifacts to tell stories. So if you're doing a group or having a conversation at work and you need to do a sort of a trust building exercise, asking your students, asking your colleagues to bring in an artifact and speak to how that artifact is informing their life, what sort of messages that artifact is telling them. Really interesting. I did this activity once and I brought in a pillow that's about 80 years old that came from my grandfather's farm that had the chicken feathers that he plucked himself. And so when I tell this story, I pull upon my heritage of growing up on a farm in Orange Grove in Florida, the legacy of what it's meant to be, orange grower's daughter, and being kind of tied to the land. So just this one artifact is pulling upon a lot of my own legacy. And I'm able to share that possibly more easily. Talking about an important moment, a critical moment in your life, you can really hear the strong, because we tend to story our critical moments, even in our own head. So last year I was in a major accident. I have almost this rote way of telling that story now. It's like I'm disconnected to it because I just told the story so many times. But that kind of creates a stuckness, right? If I'm talking to somebody who is having a deeper sort of narrative approach kind of conversation, they might start to kind of pull upon that story and see if there's other aspects that might be important to me, that it might kind of help me see that story with fresh eyes, that might fit me now, help me get unstuck from it. Deconstructing meaningful photos and images. A lot of times so I teach narrative therapy here on campus. I'm always asking my students to provide photos, favorite quotes, because you can have a lot of meaning-making conversation using those narrative questions just around what drew you to this quote, what speaks to you about this image. Okay, so we're going to show one to you now. This is an I am from poem, and it's a way to sort of experiment, to talk about, look at your identity. It's from a book that Mary Piper wrote called Writing to Change the World. And she gives an example. I won't read all that to you for the sake of time, but this is her example of her poem. I'll read it to you quickly. I am from Avis and Frank, Agnes and Fred, Glessy, May, and Mark, from the Ozark Mountains and the high plains of eastern Colorado, from mountain snowmelt and southern creeks with water moccasins. I am from oatmeal eaters, gizzard eaters, haggis, and raccoon eaters. I am from craziness, darkness, sensuality, and humor. From intense do-gooders, struggling through ranch winters in the 1920s. I am from, if you can't say anything nice about someone, don't say anything at all. And pretty is as pretty does, and damn it all to hell. I am from no dancing or drinking Methodists, but cards were okay except on Sunday. In front tent meeting holy rollers, from farmers, soldiers, bootleggers, and teachers. I am from Schwinn Girl Bikes, 1950 Mercury two-door, and West Side Story. From coyotes, baby-filled mice, chlorinous swimming pools, Milky Way, and harvest moon over Nebraska cornfields. I am from Muddy Platte and Republican, from Cottonwood and Mulberry, tumbleweed and switchgrass, from Willa Cather, Walt Whitman, and Janis Joplin. My own sweet dance unfolding against a cast of women in aprons and barefoot men in overalls. Isn't that beautiful? Never get tired of reading them. So based on this kind of format, I've asked the doc students to write their own I am from poems and have a discussion about it. So this is what you're going to see tonight. I think we go till 7:30, is that right? Okay. So you guys will have about 30, 40 minutes, I think, to kind of discuss. And then we might pull into the audience and just kind of get some closing ideas from the audience. I added this. This also came from our retreat, and I wanted to share it with you. It's a community commitment. And I guess I was thinking about this talk tonight and realizing this was with the Alamosa community as well as the Adams State campus community. And in counseling, we kind of inherently have these rules that we play by when we're doing a therapeutic group. But then I thought, well, maybe we should just kind of like make that overt because this is a larger group. So my students are really going to be sharing with you their heart. And so I wanted to kind of help create a safe space for that. So I'd like to kind of take these commitments, which are filling the space with grace, practicing empathy, self-awareness, and self-reflection, being open with yourselves and with you all, being solution-minded, stepping up and stepping back. So that means like kind of being involved and looking towards like a positive outcomes, trusting in the process, and then participating. So afterwards, we'll have a discussion and just really being respectful in that discussion. Okay, so I will pause there and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see the group just a little bit better. There we go. So I think you can see everybody. Let me see if I can do hide self. There we go. All right, so Jeff, Suresh, Kelsey, and Gray, I'm going to ask if I have the volume set okay. If you don't mind, turn your mics on. And then, Jeff, if you don't mind leading again, I don't think we quite discussed who was going to lead, but if you don't mind doing that again, I'm going to step back so that you can kind of watch the process unfold. I would say about maybe 35, 40 minutes. We'll see how it goes. And if it's not that long, it can be organic. If it goes short, that's fine. We'll just have more time for discussion. Okay?
All right. Hello, everybody. Full transparency, we actually did this in person this past Saturday, so you're getting to see a little bit of the sequel. And I know sequels are notoriously not as good as the original, but we got other two ones, so it's possible. So I'm going to start by reading my own poem, and then I'll kind of go around the circle. And also for Kelsey, Gray, and Suresh, don't wait for me to like call on you or like, you know, bring things together or bring things up like y'all jump in. Let's code these things. Okay, so this is my poem. I am from empty pockets, but also full hearts. From a cotton field birth, my grandfather's start. From magnolia blossoms and old cypress trees, from pots full of gumbo and jugs of sweet tea. From people still spouting myths of lost causes, from rainbow flags hidden, buried in closets, from fireflies flickering away in the dark, from old lynching scenes still growing in parks, from no talk of income, no politics please, from only of prayer if speaking of needs, from mysterious ways explaining all pain, from please not a hurricane, please just be rain, from the boot of the country, home of my heart, I must end with something. I'll say, bless your heart. And then I'll go ahead and ask the gray shit.
Oh. Sorry, I have to read off my phone. I am from bootstraps and food pantries, from working hands and oft bare feet, from shirt off your back even when you don't have another, from working 3 jobs to continue to suffer. From kitchen floor campouts because the bills aren't paid. From MASH always on TV and artichokes on my birthday. I'm from thinkers, from helpers, from listeners. I'm from the wounded and I'm from the healers. I am from libraries, from hopes and fantasies. From the trailer where a closet was built around me. I am from Appalachia but torn from the culture. From a family divided, forced to rebuild another. I am, however, of my Nina's mind, from her love, unconditional, but not very kind. From lifetimes of overcoming, written on her bones. From the dark, quiet roads that still feel like home. I'm from becoming mom, far too early. I am from all the queer folk who fought before me. I am from the drive, born of desperation, and from the strength and sacrifice of generations.
Thank you, Gray. It's always, because I think I've done this with Courtney all 4 times, and it's only been this constellation once, but I like books. But people are always like, why do you reread books? Like, you already know what happens, but depending on like what stage I'm at in my life and what's going on, I take something different from it every time. So, but I mean, we've kind of drawn attention before to kind of being low income and that being a common theme among ours. Can I ask about the Nina not being kind thing?
I almost said something very, very, very mean. But no, my grandmother was very, very unkind, and she loved me aggressively.
Did you ever get your ass whooped with a flip flop?
Oh, hell yeah.
Like whatever is like within grasp.
My own toys, even. Oh yeah.
Oh, wow.
While like Maury or Jerry Springer was on, or at least that was my friend. Kelsey, would you like to share?
Yes, absolutely. I am from books, from libraries and plush toys. I am from the big green house near acres of corn and soy. I am from the neighbor's buckeye tree, whose spiked fruit we gathered each fall. I am from the honeysuckle bush, smothering the tree line, covering them all. I am from black coffee and French fry grease, from growing up too fast and knowing no peace. I am from racing thoughts in closets and closed mouths, to half-hearted prayers and conversations went south. I am from the rock above the river and the iron-tasting springs. I am from the wooded path and the comfort that it brings.
Thank you, Kelsey. And kind of just among the three of us that have went so far, something I don't think we've called attention to is we're all talking geography. I hate geography, but Gray was talking Appalachia, and you were talking acres of corn and soy and honeysuckle. I have some more questions, but I'm going to go ahead and let Suresh go.
Well, okay, so I kind of wrote a different poem for today than our, yes, it's kind of a punch you in the gut kind of day for Suresh, and I thought I'd share something vulnerable with y'all. So instead of I am from, I took the liberty to kind of modify the prompt a little bit, and the poem I'm writing today is Today I Am From. So today I am from a fractured bones of what I thought was a permanent home, from a place where I thought I will never be alone, from a space where I believe that you and I will exist endlessly. Today I'm from the upside down world, feeling this pain relentlessly. Today I am from writing my signature on a dotted line that signified the end of our forever, from a starting place of having to remember you now for longer than having to know you, from a space of brittle bones that will collapse with a blow of a ringtone. Today I'm from a fish's body drowning in polluted water of every promises. Today I'm from a place of exhaustion where I don't know what to do with the ghost of you that I refuse to let go. From a place of fear of abandonment where I anxiously abandon myself in the hopes that you will, someone will, see me, save me, but only if I will make you like me. Today I am a broken man that is drowning in the silence of it's my fault in an overwhelmingly deafening pitch. From a place of suck it up, bitch, be a man. There's more to life than grief. Today I'm from a raw place, house of cards, fragile to touch. Today I am from I'm glad you found yourself. I'm glad you found you, yelled Suresh the Bing Bong as I faded into the dust. Today I am from the polar nights.
Thank you, Suresh. God damn you.
Right?
Going in to change the game.
I'm sorry. Oh man, yeah.
So there's clearly a lot in that. Courtney said that she loves a good metaphor. I do as well. The fish in polluted water kind of stuck out to me. So what I'd like to do is just kind of open up the floor. So with any poem, with anybody's experiences, what's resonating with you?
Well, I had a thought, and then Suresh came and gut punched all of us. I love what you did with that, Suresh, and I just appreciate so much your vulnerability and giving us that window into today. And I think it speaks volumes to alter the prompt that way. That was really, really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I signed the paper today to officially end it and got it notarized. So I'm just like dissolving the marriage, and it's like floating in something, and like, you know, it's coming up and down. But I think when I like Jeff said, you know, when you reread the book and depending on a different part of your life, you hear something different. Great. Things great. Yes, I heard something different this time in your poem. The wishing, working hard, but continuing to suffer, and that just hit me really hard. I don't know why. Maybe today, especially because I've been working it, keeping myself together, but it's just like continuously hitting, you know. And I'm trying to not cry right now because I know it's recorded, but I'm like,
because we can't see them. We can't see them. We'll pretend they're not there.
Yes.
And you guys create such a safe environment for me to just be me, and I like that. But it's that, right? Like that, I'm working so hard, but it's like the suffering just never stops, and I resonate with that a lot.
Well, kind of a tie between Suresh and Gray both. Gray, you mentioned, one of the first words you mentioned was bootstraps. Can you speak to that a little bit?
You know I can, Jeff.
I like that.
I don't know. I mean, that's poor culture, you know, and not really. I mean, it's the culture put on poor people. It's your fault that you're suffering, and you can always do better. And it just kills you all the time that you can't. And it's funny because when people look at me now, they say that I did. I pulled myself up. Really kind of the only person in my family that did. But I really didn't. It's just that people don't see behind any of that.
And I share similar experiences of very much the bootstrap mentality. I don't think there's such thing as a self-made person. We've all had somebody that took a chance on us. We had a teacher who gave us hell because they actually knew that we could do better. Or we have somebody who encouraged us. There's no self, not even Oprah. Sorry, Oprah. Oprah's not hard. But I kind of tying that to Suresh, the whole suck it up bitch is very much a bootstrap kind of mentality.
Yeah. That also resonates with my, because I'm also like the first generation immigrant, right? So my parents came here to America in 2000, and they didn't speak any English. They don't know, they're illiterate. So they literally are like that, like bootstrap kind of mentality. So when you say that, that also hits my home, because I'm also thinking like, oh shoot, like, this whole, it just feels insignificant, right? Like my suffering compared to theirs. Gotta be able to suck it up. Look at what they've done. Sorry, I also have ADHD, so.
Well, one thing that's okay, so we're not in person, so I can't hug people, but there is another level of intimacy in that no, we can't see the audience, and last time we could, but we're seeing into each other's homes.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that says a lot of, just as much about us, our surroundings, as what we write. Suresh, I see above your head, be kind, and I can't think of anything more representative of you. Gray, I see the cat tower. So if there was an artichoke on top of it, it just be. And
There used to be one right there, but
I see the second edition of the interpretive phenomenological analysis.
yeah, yes you do.
I know exactly what mode you're in right now.
Right.
Kelsey, I wanted to touch you mentioned racing thoughts in your poem. Can we open up a little bit about that?
Yes. So when I was thinking about this poem and kind of writing, where I'm from and kind of all of the different implications that are feeding into it, one of the things that popped into my head was how growing up, I always literally had racing thoughts, right? And I could never figure out, why or what was going on or what that meant for me or anything like that. And so in writing this poem, to be able to kind of name something that impacted me as I got older, unfortunately, not always in great ways, but to be able to name something that impacted me so deeply throughout like my childhood and my adolescence and things like that was is somewhat empowering, as even though it sounds kind of depressing in that particular phrasing, but I wrote about that because the struggle with anxiety and the struggle that that I've had trying to deal with that by myself. Something to kind of make a connection to something that I heard earlier with Suresh's poem. I heard a lot of loneliness and a lot of isolation, and that's something that I was feeling when I was writing my poem, where it was this kind of idea of like I kind of grew up separated from everybody else, where I kind of had to entertain myself, had to take care of myself, kind of had my own space, and so that racing thoughts ended up being something that filled that space, and oftentimes for worse, but was something that was really impactful in my life.
And obviously, I think the things that stick. That's why I want to hear what sticks out to all of y'all, because what sticks out to me is going to be, I guess, what I'm tying to my own experiences. Like, I developed debilitating OCD when I was 14, and so the racing thoughts are something that's we know each other well.
Yes.
And
yes.
It's what Courtney had mentioned, diagnosis, and diagnosis is such a double-edged sword, because I was so happy that there was a name for something that I was instead of crazy, but then I was also, I gotten to this point that's like, is it a disorder, or am I just wired a little differently, and can that just be fine and the way it is? Does everything have to be pathologized? And that's kind of what that made me think of. That's what that brought up.
I think that is hella powerful, and I think it touches on something that in the slides we talked about, that power, right? Because I think a lot of times, because what resonated with me, Kelsey, hearing your poem, was that no recent thoughts, and I think in the same line you said there's no peace, and I was like, fucking facts, man. Right? Like, I want stillness, but then, so I'm also coming from a Buddhist background. I go extreme, too much of anything is a problem, right? Then I'm like, oh, maybe I want some stillness. Then I'm like, too much stillness. Now, way too much in my head now. So there's just no fucking peace no matter where I go. This continuation of suffering, which then kind of makes me feel like maybe I suffer because I feel powerless in my suffering. And then I think then to myself, right, because I'm also a fucking overthinker, the idea of, like, our loneliness is subjective, but we're never alone in our loneliness.
And I think kind of tying that, like, kind of what but to be human is to feel pain. And that's part of we have to be able to take the bitter with the sweet, just like you can't selectively numb emotions with like drugs and alcohol. You can't selectively be open to certain experiences in your life. You either tilt your heart open to life and receive the sad and the sweet, or you close yourself off to both. And like I went to counseling and stuff, and it didn't help me, because it's all like, we're gonna challenge these cognitive distortions and do thought stopping. And to me, it's that whole metaphor of when you're sinking in quicksand, the last thing you need to do is wrestle with it. You just need to lay flat and just accept, like, okay, my thoughts aren't facts. My brain is going to make thoughts just like my stomach is going to make gravels. It's just what brains do. So instead of like engaging and kicking around in the quicksand, which just makes it worse, if you just allow yourself to lie flat, you kind of rise to the top. I think that's what helped it be less debilitating and helped me be more functional. But I hear struggle in the quicksand in all of our poems.
Yeah. I think a lot of that too, it kind of reminds me, thinking about diagnoses and thinking about not suffering alone, and a lot of this is why I was so drawn to like narrative therapy, because I can deconstruct so much of it. I also was like, ooh, there's a thing that I am, this makes sense, and and in so many ways that I experienced that, but then it all kind of quickly was also weaponized against me, right? If you're using that language to define yourself, then people define you by it and their own ideas about it. Like I can't possibly go to a doctor now without being told whatever I'm saying is wrong is my anxiety. You know you have anxiety, that's what it is. And it drives me mad. But it also allows for conversations with clients like why do we seek these diagnoses, right? Like why do we want them? And overwhelmingly it's to connect with other people and to be able to have language to understand ourselves and to be understood. And I mean, that's so much of what I think all of us as humans, but all of us here also, we want. We just want to connect. We want to not feel alone in that suffering.
Okay. Okay. Talking about being alone and feeling isolated. Kelsey, was it you that mentioned prayer?
I had said half-hearted prayers. Yes.
Dive into that.
Okay. So when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about all of the ways that in my life that I attempted to manage the loneliness, the pain, the hurt, all of those different things. And, one of the things that I did was pray. I came from a religious background, and it wasn't, super, super religious, but it was religious enough that you were supposed to go to church and you were supposed to pray, and that was just what it was. And so I prayed, but, in my experience, it didn't do anything for me. And, I found myself in a space where I was like, I don't feel like I'm being heard. And to kind of take that to, another degree, something else that was also in my mind when I was writing that was like the types of prayers that were being said, right? Because I grew up from a home of abuse. And so, having those prayers of, wanting that to stop or, whatever the case may be, it felt like a half-hearted kind of like, okay, I'm going to do this because this is what I'm supposed to do, but what's it doing for me? And so it kind of sent me back to that space of loneliness. And, thinking about kind of connecting with like the conversations myself, right? Like those attempts to try to reach out and try to get the support that I needed and, not ever really receiving it. So that's kind of what I was thinking of during that moment. And it sounds almost like I can kind of hear that same feeling in each of your poems. Where that feeling is relatable, even if the actual exact circumstances aren't necessarily.
Yeah, because it's funny because I'm sorry, Jeff.
Yeah. Give you this board.
I usually don't really think about how that I was raised with that kind of background also, because religion is just so far from my life now. But the last time that I prayed, because I was raised very similarly, was to just desperately not be trans. And it was terrifying. And just that idea of like half-hearted prayers and listening to you talk, like it just, it hit me because I haven't thought about that in a long time.
I similarly grew up Southern Baptist, preacher beating on the Bible about all the faggots are going to hell. So I prayed the please don't let me be gay, please make me straight thing 1,000 times and felt like it fell upon deaf ears. And Suresh mentioned his religion, so it was something that kind of came up, but that all goes back to connection too. It was all us seeking something, and we couldn't find it in our physical world. We tried to seek it in the spiritual world, and We were looking for something to understand us, something to walk alongside us.
I'm also like noticing another theme that I'm hearing, right? Is that there is this sort of human tendency to want to connect and to be understood. And I've read somewhere where to be accepted is to be loved, right? And I hear that, but in that suffering, I'm also hearing sort of like a connection with all of our stories of there's this sort of sense of hiding, like you gotta hide your suffering. Either internally, either societally, either culturally. That hit me, right? Because I feel like right now, this is by far, emotionally speaking, the worst shit I've ever been. And I feel like I need to hide it. I feel like I don't know why I cannot show my emotions. And I want to. And I want to talk to people that I feel safe with. But immediately there's like, ooh, I don't want to hide that stuff. And I hear that in Kelsey's stories. And I hear that in Gray's poems. Also in your poem, Jeff. So.
And that's the kicker, though, isn't it? We all want connection. We want acceptance. And I may be overgeneralizing. I can't speak to your own experiences, but it's almost like if I show this person how fucking damaged that I am, they're not gonna want to connect with me. So you gotta stop that shit.
Oh, Jeff, all of this is so funny because what you just said, I've talked to Kelsey so many times because we first spotted each other at our interviews for this program. It was like 2 years later, and I was like, Kelsey, I really want to be your friend, please. And I was so terrified. And we both were grown-ups, but we both were. Yeah. But it's just that need for connection. But before Suresh just came in and dropped a whole bomb on us today, the thing that I realized that despite the fact that we've talked about our queerness so many times amongst the three of us, Kelsey and Jeff and I, the one thing we haven't noted is that in this, the way we talk about it is closets. It's hiding. And it's the way that's done to us. And we all did that. We all said closets. We all did.
That's one benefit of being at home, though. I can pull out pride supplies. Feels a little less closet.
Yeah. It's all that connection. It's all and that hiding. That's Suresh Tamang.
This also reminds me of something that because I don't have books here, but your boy reads a lot. And I also listen to a lot of songs. And when your heart is broken, fucking lyrics just hit you differently. I think it's the Beatles. Or was it Papa Roach? I don't know. It's one of those, right?
Those are two very different groups.
Who said, be mindful of your sensitivities, right? Because your sensitivities create your prison around you. Oh, I think it's Elton John who said, your sensitivities will create your prison. And I was like, that's what this sort of reminds me of, the prison, the closet that was forced onto me, right? I cannot, and I think that is my privilege, right? Being a heterosexual and a man in here, I'm privileged that that kind of shit is not pushed on me. But I feel like the sensitivity I have is something different that I have created my own little prison around it. In some ways, I'm like, fuck, what a privilege. But in some ways, I'm like, damn, there are people who are constantly having to kind of fight for that basic right.
Suresh, and I think that goes kind of back to something we discussed last week and what Courtney was talking about with intersectionality. Somebody else suffering in one regard doesn't negate your own suffering in another area of life. I mean, I'm a fucking white guy. We talk who wants to hear my problems? I mean, it doesn't negate the fact that we're all this the ubiquity of human suffering. You're allowed to have your own struggles. Struggles are hard enough without feeling guilty about them. And since this is the sequel, I've debated. So like it's almost like my brain's like, is it just a presentation or is it real or can it be both? I almost reached out to you like 10 times this week, Suresh, just to check on you. And I was like, we did one presentation. Like, don't be weird. Don't cross boundaries. But I've been concerned about you.
Yeah. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate that because there are moments where, like Kelsey, the racing thoughts, right? I cannot. So my circadian rhythm has been out of whack since coming from Colorado, Idaho. So I now already got insomnia, but after I knew the day was coming around sign, and I definitely was in dark spots, man. I'm not gonna lie to you about that. I was pretty dark, like going to sleep at like 5 in the morning, because I'm like, it gets pretty heavy and dark in that head sometimes, But I realized there are people who depend on me, and I realized that it's okay for me to depend on them depending on me. And sometimes that's the push that helps me move forward. Well, please text me, man. I'm always available. If nothing else, send me songs. I'm listening to. I'm trying to build some positive core metal songs right now. So.
Ooh, I was a huge metalhead, Suresh. But also now at least I know that you like the Beatles, Elton John, and Papa Roach. So, but also it just really hit me the way you were just saying that too, because it's also okay to be going to bed at 5 a.m. and suffering. Like, it's okay to be there, We've all had to be in that space, and you can't always just come out of it because you want to.
Right. And it just hits you in such weird times. I was in class yesterday, and my colleague was just like, "Hey, are you okay?" And I was like, "Why would you bring that attention?" Because then now I'm like, I have to get away from the screen for a few seconds, and I'm like, "Oh, let me come back now." And then we go back into it, and then it's just like touch and go, right? And I feel like that's okay. Like, you don't have to have a perfect way of reading things. You can touch and go, touch and go, touch and go, create space around it. At least that's what's working. And so maybe it won't, and then that's okay. And I would probably go, get myself another puppy. I don't know.
I've been thinking about that. And it gut punches you out of nowhere. I cried for 20 minutes in the shower yesterday, and I don't know where it came from.
Mm-hmm.
And like
the warm hugs. Mm-hmm.
When I was riding down with a cohort member to Alamosa for labs, a certain song came on the radio. I started bawling, and she's like, "Oh shit, what is wrong with you?" I was like, "I can't go into this right now."
I hate to pause you all.
I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for that. I really appreciate your vulnerability, though. Like, oh my goodness. Whenever I watch y'all talk, I'm always kind of blown away by your willingness to bring your authenticity. And I'm not sure if that's the right space to pause you. Is there any closing thoughts from any of you before I kind of go into a moment of discussing what we kind of pull takeaways kind of thing?
My only closing thought is from now on, if I can't remember where a lyric is from, I'm going to say it's either Elton John, the Beatles, or Papa Roach.
I've seen
Don't go too high.
and Papa Roach in concert. Okay.
Okay.
That's not a statement. Yeah.
Love you all.
I love you guys. Thank you so much.
So I think there's you can probably notice there's a lot of bonding that's happened. Their connection is really the fact that they've been in this presentation with me and doing this group in different settings. Some of them are in the same cohort, so they do know each other from that, but this is a mixed cohort group. What sort of, as a group here, what sort of themes really popped out to you in this discussion that emerged? You want to try? There's no wrong answers.
I was gonna say trust.
Trust.
Deep trust.
Deep trust. You have to, and not even just for each other, but really trust for you all to hold a space that would allow them to be so authentic. I mean, that's a lot of handing that over to you and saying, can you hold my reality for a moment? And when we think about like diversity, equity, inclusion, it's about meeting folks where they are with all their deep feelings, big emotions, sometimes maybe even like for some folks could be abrasive because of the cuss. I mean, I cuss too, so I can't say anything about that. I love that y'all were authentic. I appreciate that you brought yourselves, but you can have your own reactions to this. But allowing folks to be their authentic selves and holding space for that, there's some real power in that. And I think we saw the connection piece really kind of emerge. What other sort of things did you notice that came out from their sharing of things?
It's about the connection, the universality of suffering.
The universality. It got very existential very quickly. Suffering, the sort of history of suffering from childhood abuse, but also suffering from current day, suffering mentally and emotionally from anxiety, loneliness, grief, and these sort of shared experiences. Y'all had a really interesting conversation about how grief is experienced alone, but you're never really alone. There's this universal experience of it and what that feels like. Did you feel like you got an insight into their lived experiences of what it is to be in the world? And so I think that the power of this approach is it kind of gets you out of your own way because you're sharing this poem and it's about yourself and it's kind of this creative way, so it's activating different parts of your brain, and in sharing it, you share bits of your soul. And so you're kind of already meeting each other in a way that we don't commonly do so. How was this for you all? Can I we have just a few moments and I'll ask for questions from the audience. From my esteemed doc students here, what was it like this time for you all? Different things emerged this time than in the past. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, Suresh tricked us, but, and I know that to a point I was kind of nervous about it, like kind of nervous that we wouldn't be able to have a different conversation, but also kind of excited about what would happen. And it still was so authentic, and it was actually kind of really nice to just be Zooming it. It did feel a little weirdly more personal.
There's a weird intimacy that happens when you're online, and then also I think when you're surrounded by your natural artifacts from your homes, I think it can give you a sense of safety to a certain degree. Also, I wonder if me coming out of the visual field allows you to feel like it's just the four of you a little bit more. We've noticed that so we've been teaching a lot online. During the pandemic, we could not do our counseling groups that we do in the summertime. We used to do face-to-face. We had to do them online. And I was worried that we wouldn't really get to see what folks are doing. But you can catch a lot. It's pretty impressive, all that you can pick up and the emotion that you can pick up, even if it is virtual. Any other closing comments from my participants?
I appreciated the opportunity to continue the conversation. I know Suresh used the word gut punch. I left the last one feeling gut punch, and I had to rush out of there, and I kind of needed to leave. So it's always anxiety inducing, like to lead it, because you have to come in and out of that space of being like vulnerable, and then also making sure that we're attending to everyone else's stories. So it's kind of something that was going on in the background.
Mm-hmm. It's in some ways you are witnessing what it looks like to have a continued group therapeutic process. Why don't I just take a few moments to take questions from the audience about the process, what elements of the therapeutic group, anything with diversity, equity, inclusion, about narrative theory, any questions? Yes.
So you use the poem as a point of entry to stimulate the conversation. What other strategies do you employ to initiate this sort of discussion?
In this realm of the poem, or just other narrative strategies?
Narrative strategies. In
general. So I mentioned before we did the poem, the artifacts, when people bring the artifacts, the quotations. Quotations, I think, because we all kind of have a few that we carry with us. My favorite one is, and then the time came when the courage to though, the pain it took to stay tight in a bud was greater than the courage it took to blossom. I've carried this quote with me since I was 19 years old, and it speaks to me at different points. So if I was going to do a share out and someone said, what's your quote? And it's actually anonymous. A lot of folks think Annalise Nin said it, but it's not actually true, it's just anonymous. That by talking about that, it touches parts of me in which I had to really be courageous. I had to go outside myself. And so immediately I am thinking of these significant moments and almost willing to be more vulnerable because those parts of me are activated and wanting to share. The critical moments that I talked about, so instead each person would share a critical moment and talk about the sort of meanings behind that critical moment. In that moment, were you the hero? Did you feel like the victim? How did you position yourself in that critical moment? What was the outcome? What might have been the outcome? Are there regrets? A lot of those critical moments are piled high with regret, which is why we hold them with us. Helping kind of pull apart those stories and having a new audience to hear them, possibly hear different elements of the story, possibly see you different, to help you see yourself in a different position. Even like with students' memes, sometimes just for fun I'll have online teaching, I'll have my students take a meme and share it. No words, they just take a meme. Another activity I use is at the end of a group, I'm running out of time, I'll ask each person to have one word that's really talking to them in that moment. No explanations. It's a way of kind of creating a shared experience. Because sometimes when you hear those words, you're like, oh, I get that. No matter what the word is. Sometimes it's exhausted. Sometimes it's gratitude. Sometimes it's stunned. I mean, it could be anything. But hearing each of those words, it's like they're giving you a gift. It's so much more than that. Other questions? What did you think about seeing this like intimate group? It's different. It's like seeing an insight into therapy. Seeing what it looks like sometimes. The difference is this would be like a group that in which there was not a designated therapist leader. It's like more of a discussion group, but you can see how it could be therapeutic. I mean, even just in hearing how the participants were so grateful to be able to do it again so soon, because there's that kind of like, I felt a little open after walking out of that. This helped give it some closure. You have to come revisit the conversation. Any other questions?
This is more, no, go ahead.
If you had a group and half of them were very verbal and half of them weren't, would you interject more?
If I was leading it, so like this, if I would probably start to try to make links between the people who were not as verbal. Because introverts, they may not say as much, but they got lots going on inside. So what they say is like little dropping the mic moments. So I'm gonna really listen when they speak. And I'm gonna take whatever they said or the meaning behind what they said or the feeling behind what they said, and I'm gonna link it to one of the other stories and see if I can garner some connection that way. Good question. Mm-hmm. What were you gonna ask?
Yeah, it was more an observation than a question, but I just being here tonight, I think was a little bit therapeutic for me.
There's something very healing in seeing the woundedness in others. It's like, okay, I see your woundedness and it connects with my woundedness. And in our woundedness, we can heal. There's this great quote I read recently, only the wounded can heal the wounded. We have to know a little something about that to be able to connect with it. And I think you've heard that theme you've generated with even in the discussion of I'm so afraid, just to kind of paraphrase, I'm not sure which of y'all said it because you kind of all agree with it. I'm so aware, painfully aware of my own woundedness. I didn't even want to put myself out there because I didn't want you to see. But the reality is, it's the woundedness that's the beauty. And this kind of resounding message of it's okay to hurt. It's okay to be kind of messed up. It's okay to be grieving. It's okay to be lost. We can't stay there. but we can be there for a while because it's part of being human. I think they really modeled the humanity very beautifully. I hope you know how to appreciate that. Any other closing questions? Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and thank you all to our doc students for showing up and doing what you do so well. Thank you.